maybe, I don't know, Mathieu, I'll take maybe my cue from you or from Lisa Marie or Nina when you think it's okay. Maybe we give folks another 60 seconds or so.
Yes. Yep.
Just to mention to all the participants currently dialing in, we see that there's a lot sort of standing in line as it were, waiting to be admitted. So we'll just give folks another 20-30 seconds and then we'll get started. Maybe, Metro, do you think it would be advisable to sort of ever so slowly get going? What do you think?
I think we can start. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, you can hear me. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, please take it away.
Okay. So I would start even as other participants are dialing in as we slowly get going. Those that are dialed in, I would welcome to this webinar dedicated to the recommendations we have put forward on amendments to the CACM regulation. We have a pre-lunch and a post-lunch session in store. I'm of the impression that many of you will be dialing into both, but that may not be for all. So I'll start these two sessions, this one before lunch and the other one after lunch, with just a bit of, shall we say, background and a bit of process, and then we'll go to the session proper. So in terms of background to this webinar, roughly 1 year ago, we at ACER, we received a request by the European Commission to provide a recommendation on amendments to the CACM regulation, so the Capacity Allocation and Congestion Management regulation. We have done quite a number of work in terms of scoping, drafting, public consultation, predominantly in the first half of the year. And then ACER, along with the national regulatory authorities, have evaluated all the input and started a review process with TSOs and NEMOs. And that has resulted in us at ACER, pursuant to the agreement reached within our board of regulators, where sits all the 27 NRAs. We sent a recommendation before Christmas to the European Commission, and we also made it publicly available at the same time. This is an ambitious recommendation which strives to improve the entire CACM regulation, and it proposes changes on a wide array of topics, and indeed that is the purpose of these two sessions of the webinar that we have today. We aim with this to improve the CACM regulation across a number of different areas, and we'll go through the market coupling, governance and operations part this morning. So part of the idea is for us as ACER to go through the main elements, but also to have a discussion with external stakeholders on some of those elements. And those of you who are familiar with today's agenda will see how we have tried to put that together. A bit on the process, as I see participants are still dialing in. Obviously, those that are speaking in the panel discussions, the different presenters will have the possibility to speak. Others are muted, but can pose questions via the Slido system, which I expect many of you to be quite familiar with by now. And so we'll tackle these after the panel session proper. And that session will be moderated by Christophe Janscreux, who heads the electricity department at ACER. We are a bit pressed for time, so yeah, exactly. I sort of said that. Thank you for the agenda. So you'll see that Christophe will moderate towards the end after the panel session, building on the questions or comments submitted via Slido. We have roughly 15 minutes a priori allocated to it, and so I would just note that it's probably unlikely that all questions or comments can be tackled, but we will tackle some for sure. Now, in terms of the first session that we have, maybe some housekeeping rules first. So if one is not speaking, we would ask to have the mic muted and the camera off. I will also mute myself and put my camera off in a second when I hand over to Mathieu. The Slido system you can see there. Please submit questions as it were. And again, we will have a bit of a Q&A or a follow-up answering session, which Christophe will moderate. And indeed, as it says there, it would be good if indeed you want to pose a comment or a question to one particular individual that you specify that in the Slido question that you submit, so Christophe can distribute accordingly. We would mention that we record this webinar and that we would make it available on our website so that those who do not have the possibility to dial in can also follow it, as it were. Mathieu, is there, or Lisa Marie, anything else I should mention in terms of housekeeping rules before we kick off the first session?
No, don't think so. I will take the next slide because it gives a bit of an overview of the topics covered in both agenda points. But I think I can take that slide.
No, I can kick off a little bit on the first session before I hand over to you. It's more in terms of housekeeping, whether you think I omitted anything.
Yes. No. That was okay. That was it. No,
okay.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
All right. Yeah. No, so just to give you a few more minutes of intro, and then I hand over to you, Mathieu. Yeah. So we have a pre-launch and a post-launch session. The first session is dedicated to that part of the CACM amendment recommendations as concerns market coupling, governance, and operations. So really a key element in power market integration across Europe, to some extent the crown jewel, if you will. And basically by way of background, through market coupling, the day-ahead and intraday electricity markets in Europe are integrated through common algorithms, and thereby increasing the efficient use of cross-zonal capacity, and thereby also the overall efficiency of the European electricity market. We have found that with these proposed amendments to the CACM regulation, or CACM 2.0 as we call it, it has offered a bit of a chance to step back and assess the current situation and see what ways we could further improve or further develop market coupling for the future. And indeed, we see this as an opportunity to make the CACM regulation a bit fit for future challenges. And indeed, there are several future challenges ahead of us. And just to name a few, there's obviously very increasing electrification efforts underway in Europe. A lot of that new electricity generation will be of intermittent renewable generation. There's increased demand flexibility needs. And associated with that, a need to trade more closer to real time. And indeed, we see probably an increased dependence for security of supply on well-integrated electricity markets across Europe. And indeed, here I would say that this seems to be increasingly and also explicitly acknowledged in national resource adequacy assessments of late. So we have a dedicated initial impact assessment put together related to our recommendations. And here various topics related to the market coupling organization that we propose have been described and analyzed. We have put forth some of the problems experienced so far, and we have also, of course, proposed some changes to address these problems. There's also important proposals on safe market coupling operations and necessary developments thereof. And in this particular session, that is the first, the pre-launch session, we will present, I think, Mathieu, you will present our final recommendations to the Commission on these issues, and then we will engage in a panel discussion with stakeholders, and then we go to the Q&A session moderated by Christophe. So that's how I would introduce this, and with no further ado, Mathieu, I leave the floor to you, and I mute and on camera myself.
Thank you, Christian. Thank you for this this introduction. Yes, indeed. Let me flip to the next slide. So, indeed, we'll tell you about our recommendation on MCO governance today, and see and try to go through indeed stepwise to indeed the improvements. They will take the order of how they are in the draft recommendation, and indeed in the headline show what yeah, where you can find them, in which articles, and what articles we referred to. I for now indeed already apologies for those that are not really deeply into this topic. I will try to explain a bit on every topic. But I hope you can understand that these are well, sort of complicated, but we'll try to make it as accessible as we can during the presentation. But of course, also questions and answers are available for afterwards. Yeah, so maybe to start indeed with the first part. So CACM is indeed a regulation, but indeed it puts forward the requirements for decision making, basically, mainly on terms and conditions and methodologies which follow from CACM. And indeed, those are voted over by TSOs and NEMOs. And one of the very initial and I think first topic to cover is the qualified majority voting. So qualified majority voting is the EU treaty voting rule based on a double majority voting, weighing both the member states and the member states based on population, and then a certain percentage needs to be made when voting, and indeed if that percentage is made, then a proposal is accepted. This is the same as used in the EU Council, and this has been indeed the part of the CACM regulation already before, but it was indeed there for TSOs. But indeed, until now, not really defined specifically for NEMOs. So what we included in the recommendation was a more specific QMV for NEMOs, and indeed a more specific designed setup when TSOs and NEMOs need to vote together. So voting together on TCMs, which concerns them both, has indeed been part of that. And we consider that indeed this QMV is needed for a more efficient decision-making process, making sure that indeed the interests of both sides in market coupling indeed are covered by this decision-making. It's indeed, as I said, the standard principle on EU level. And indeed a proposal to have a balanced distribution of voting rights for all NEMOs involved. One of the points indeed which was added was indeed also giving NEMOs exactly the same giving the NEMOs indeed also a weighted vote, because giving all NEMOs or each NEMO exactly the same voting right indeed would not be unfair to those having a very bigger stake in European market coupling because they're active in more than one country, for instance. Then we also included a general rule for member states with more than one NEMO. So there's definitely a number of member states where more than one NEMO is active, and that NEMO can be designated in that country. I will come back to that later. Designated or passported, and it's trading and it's selling NEMO trading services in that member state, and the share of the member state is indeed now divided based 1/3 on whether it's designated or passporting in that country, and 2/3 based on the respective traded volume in the preceding year. Then, and indeed going to subsequent articles on the designation of NEMOs and NEMO competition. So NEMO designation is a process in the CACM regulation where in each member state there is a requirement that there needs to be at least one NEMO to provide trading services. And before that was indeed a designation requirement. We now expanded this to be either designated in that member state or indeed passporting. And to explain passporting is basically a NEMO designated in one member state being able to offer trading services in another member state. And indeed, those NEMOs should be indeed treated equally. And until now, this was unclear in the current CACM regulation. And because we see that more and more member states might indeed might resort to only passporting NEMOs, the process of designation and indeed for passporting, as well as the oversight on those passporting NEMOs, and indeed their the possibility of whether or not they are able to withdraw their passporting or their activity is indeed strengthened in the proposals. Then on competitive versus monopoly NEMO. So there's the possibility for pre-existing monopoly NEMOs in a number of member states to continue this monopoly function, monopoly role in those member states. And that setting basically doesn't change. We do propose to assess a number of years after entering into force a report on the development of competition between NEMOs, and 3 years after that, a commission to provide its own report investigating competition, level playing field, and the need for legal monopolies and a coexistence of competitive and monopoly NEMOs in different member states. And on the basis of those reports, EC may consider, and we propose to look at further measures to further increase competition. And indeed, then finally, indeed, a possibility for member states to review whether indeed the continuation of natural legal monopolies is needed 4 years after entering into force. So that's definitely a process where, reviewing whether competition works or indeed whether a move to more competition or to less competition is indeed the way forward. Then I come to the, I think the pivotal point of our recommendation on the aspect of governance around market coupling. Governance, basically the organization and indeed the entities, the tasks that the entities that perform the tasks related to market coupling, which are the centralized tasks on a European level. And we went through a process where we designed a number of options, policy options to look in different areas of governance. One is decision making. One are the entities responsible for the MCO test, so who is responsible. And one is on clearing and settlement, which is quite a specific MCO task, which really is more a financial service in that respect. On decision making, we then have had three options on the table. Basically, the baseline, where indeed the current decision making continues, where indeed NEMOs are responsible for market coupling, and I see a remark on sound being low. I hope it's not for everyone, but I will put my mic a bit closer to me. So
you're fine. I hear you fine, Mathieu.
Okay. Thank you. So on the decision making, indeed, the first policy option proposed was joint decision making body with QMV, as I explained before. A joint decision making body, indeed, combining all the TSOs, all the NEMOs across Europe in one decision making body, voting with QMV on all the TCMs, so all the proposals to NRAs, but also on all the internal operational decisions on development and operation on market coupling. A third level or a third option in this respect was an independent board, where indeed not the NEMOs and TSOs would sit, but independent expert would sit, and independent expert would make a decision. Then on entities responsible for the MCO tasks, currently all NEMOs together are responsible for executing the tasks. This means that there's a rotating mechanism between NEMOs executing market coupling and indeed having a role in each of the processes. A next step in that is to reduce the number of entities, making them unbundled from NEMOs, but to move to a limited number of unbundled entities performing these MCO tasks. And the third one is indeed a legal single entity executing all the MCO tasks on a European level, separated from NEMOs, indeed as a separate organization. Then on clearing and settlement. On clearing and settlement, I think the two options are basically distinguishable with the term NEMO to NEMO or NEMO to MCO. NEMO to NEMO meaning every NEMO clears and settles all the trades and transactions happening on market coupling between each NEMO. This means that every NEMO has a relation with every NEMO in either its bidding zone or indeed in the bidding zones across the border. And the NEMO to MCO model means the MCO has a clearing and settlement towards the NEMO. Each NEMO has a relation with the MCO, but the NEMOs themselves don't have a relation anymore with the other NEMOs, basically making it a more indeed centralized approach. Let me click. Oh, sorry. Yeah. So on our recommendation in the end, and I won't read the little letters, but you can review them. They're also part of the initial impact assessment. But indeed, the proposal from ACER side is to propose a joint decision-making body. Indeed, with UMV voting, combining all the TSOs and NEMOs in one group for decision making. A legal single entity to be introduced after five years after entering into force of this new regulation, merging indeed all the centralized tasks under one entity. And as a third, the clearing and settlement need to be proposed as a MCO task, meaning that indeed from that point when this legal single entity is formed, this will be a centralized role, although indeed we give the room for delegating as an MCO this task to financial institutions currently also providing the services. In the discussion on MCO organization, and those of you following the debate have indeed heard that there's indeed quite some concerns from NEMOs and TSOs on this proposal. And well, I think the counter proposal from TSOs, I think, can be summarized as indeed the TSOs requesting to indeed only introduce the joint decision-making body as an improvement to governance, and we need to not centralize MCO tasks to this entity and having them performed and reorganized by that. I think our main reason for indeed not going with that proposal was that we see a number of problems in the current market coupling, and that we also see that those problems we analyzed in our initial impact assessment indeed are not addressed by just changing the governance, but indeed need to be combined with changing the decision making and indeed also changing the entities performing MCO tasks. And this indeed relates to the development and operation, which is indeed currently complex, costly, and indeed shows delays in the recent years. It's about the regulatory oversight and enforcement. Having clear roles and responsibilities for entities active in market coupling is indeed difficult to see. I will not. I see that I'm a little bit limited, sort of passing my time, so I will move on. But indeed, I think we see that the ACER proposal is indeed better covering these principles. Then on MCO tasks and responsibilities and the delegation. So what indeed also was one of the recommendations is to better define market coupling tasks and responsibilities, and separating the monopolistic tasks, so those that are performed at the central level where no competition is possible, and separate them from the competitive tasks where indeed NEMO competition can happen in different member states. In that same part, indeed, NEMOs and TSOs may also delegate part of the task to a third party in a member state, but indeed only if it's able to set out or to perform this task as effectively as the delegating entity, and indeed regulatory oversight stays in place. I think in the bottom you can see where those separation mainly happen. So on a higher level, it's indeed pre-coupling, all the preparation and the competition on NEMO side, the coupling where we run the algorithm and do the clearing and settlements between NEMOs, and the post-coupling where it's order settlement with market participants and clearing and settlement there. Then on proposals related to market coupling costs. So with the centralization and clarity on the cost part, or on the task part, we can also better regulate the cost, and indeed then subsequently ensure that those European costs for market coupling are indeed settled in a harmonized way and ensuring level playing field between NEMOs. Our current proposal is to put the cost of market coupling via TSOs on national network tariff, but we do see a benefit in allocating part of the MCO costs directly to NEMOs to be included in their competitive fee, so that indeed not all the costs are on the end consumers, but indeed also on the users of the market coupling system. And one of the additional points we introduce is a possibility to ensure the continuity of market coupling by introducing a NEMO of the last resort function, which makes sure that in case of a default in case of a default of a NEMO, that there's a continuation of market coupling and it doesn't stop. Then on the implementation timeline proposals, a discussion like this is always hard because well, you're setting legislation and you also need to design how you would come from the current situation into a new. And indeed, if the Commission would take a recommendation, we propose to put a deadline sort of far in the future, 5 years from now, and then a development based on the different terms and conditions and methodologies to indeed develop and set up this entity. And each TCM in the CACM regulation will specify the categories of requirements and what can implement it, and every step of the way it could be done. And indeed, TCM implementation deadlines allow for such flexibility and give the possibility to move on. What is important to emphasize is indeed this faraway deadline also should ensure that ongoing implementation products are not hampered. So the intraday auctions, the 50-minute, the flow-based should indeed all be finalized by the end of 2025. And indeed, then subsequently, this reorganization can take place. It would allow indeed for quick and easy improvements under the current MCO organization. So indeed, all other parts, which we'll talk about later, but would indeed also have a clear long-term target and sufficient time for the new MCO organization. And I think that's it from my side. Sorry to take a bit more time, but I think I'm almost within time. I think I would then now directly give it to, I think, Rafael and Kjell, who are hopefully online.
Yeah.
You can turn on your cameras and we can all see you. And then give the floor to you.
Thank you. First of all, thank you very much, Mattia and ACER, for giving us the opportunity to speak in the workshop and to present publicly our position. I'm referring to ours because I'm speaking together with Kiel on behalf of all NEMOs and all TSOs as well. So the first message we need, I would say we need to share with the audience, and in particular with market participants, is that NEMOs and TSOs, we are deeply worried about the ACER proposal. If I may say, the direction of travel by ACER is not the right one. And in particular, we strongly disagree with the idea to create such a single legal entity to perform the MCO tasks. ACER published the so-called initial impact assessment. If I may be diplomatic, I would say it's a kind of very, very extremely initial impact assessment. And I will refer to 5 points we want to make clear to the audience. First, a clear message to you all. The creation of a new single entity will not solve any of the presented issues by ACER. If I can pick up an example, we started the so-called multi-regional coupling 7 years ago. We have run almost 2,600 of day-ahead sessions. We faced in this period of time, 7 years, 3, by the way, partial decouplings. We faced 0 full decouplings. And you know what? Even more. I mean, none of the 3 partial decouplings would have been avoided by the single entity proposed by ACER. Second message, pretty clear to all the market participants: operational security is at risk. ACER is proposing something from scratch, created ex nihilo. I mean, with no expertise, with no MCO assets, and even more, losing all the experience we gained in the 7 years working together, NEMOs and TSOs, running, coupling in Europe. The proposal by ACER, I mean, Mathieu already mentioned that, is losing, the reliability in operations we deliver now with several, NEMOs running the day-ahead market, giving a perfect, precise, backup for the functioning of the MCO tasks. Third, first point in the presentation by ACER was QMV. We are already under the early implementation scheme of the joint governance by NEMOs and TSOs. We are undertaking, this challenge. We think ACER is, confusing, implementation of new project challenges with operation. New QMV for, joint QMV for both NEMOs and TSOs, is almost there. Fourth, there is no, clear improvement in the regulatory oversight, in terms of cost and in terms of accountability. If I may say, complexity will remain, specificities remain, innovation even will facilitate, new challenges. And for facing these challenges, we will still need to undertake, relevant changes in the local trading platforms and also TSO systems. So complexity will remain, and even it will increase, with the challenges we all have ahead. And to be brief, regarding the proposal of the so-called last resort, NEMO, again, to be diplomatic, I mean, it is very far from reality. It's really disproportionate, So, as commented, and I need to stop here. I saw, how can I say this? I mean, one of the slides presented by ACER is not right. If you, there is a table compared, the different challenges, and it's stated by ACER that our, TSO NEMO option is not addressing almost, none of them. I mean, and it's completely false. We already presented the so-called option 3, the joint proposal by NEMOs and TSOs to ACER, to all the national regulatory authorities. We received, very relevant support by national regulators as well, and market participants is the public forum, referring, for instance, to the MESC forum. So our option 3, I mean, we strongly believe that once, a proper cost-benefit analysis run, option 3 will be much better, absolutely. Because, as you can see on the slide, I mean, the ACER proposal will imply higher cost of different nature regarding the transition, the inefficiencies in the operation, and indeed, increasing, the risk of this operation. But I mean, we strongly feel as well that our proposal is much more respectful with the subsidiarity and proportionality principles, and indeed it fits better, with the boundaries of implementing acts. Final word, is that is quite shocking in this environment. I would say political, social environment. In the debate we face in all member states with energy prices, with the questions around the future European power market design, is again it's very worrying that the ACER proposal goes just in this governance part, creating such a disruption. So I will stop here, and Kiel, I'm handing over to you for your comments, please.
Thank you for that. And then I will also, on behalf of all the TSOs, thank ACER for the opportunity to take part in or to contribute in the amendment process, even though we do not support all the amendments made. For the TSOs, a robust and secure market coupling is very important. And this, of course, includes the fallback solutions that may be chosen. On the positive side, TSOs, we do appreciate that we now have a more clearer role and responsibility together with the NEMOs in market coupling. This we do believe is very important, and it's a very good step forward. Now, having said that, we do share the concerns expressed by the NEMOs. In particular, we think that this move towards a single entity may jeopardize ongoing crucial activities for market coupling, and also we really question whether it will be a more efficient way of implementing the challenging projects ahead of us. I also would like to say that within the current organization of the market coupling function, TSOs and NEMOs are jointly working together to improve the governance and the efficiency in our decision-making process. We are putting in place a market coupling steering committee already in February, and we will move to qualified majority voting that will improve our decision making very soon. So I think that shows us that it is possible to make changes to the current process without making too dramatic changes, and it will improve. I would also like to say that the TSOs and NEMOs, we are now working together on a more detailed assessment and reaction, both on the amendments made by amendment proposals by ACER, but also the impact assessment. And I think we, as Rafael mentioned, the impact assessment could probably be on some points, we see that it is not necessarily so realistic. So with that, I think I will just like to conclude and say that we are happy to work further on the amendments to ensure that they become better than what they are today. So thank you for that. And then I think I will hand it back to Mathieu.
Thank you, Kjell. Thank you, Rafael. Yes, thank you for indeed clearly stating your position on this. I think we indeed, well, we went through the whole process. I think it's clear that indeed as an independent entity, ACER is, and indeed with support of the majority of NRAs, we see that indeed moving into more centralization on this MCO is indeed our proposed way forward. Of course, this recommendation is indeed not the end of the process. Discussion will continue, and I hope we can indeed find a way through. I think it's already good that the TSOs and NEMOs are indeed implementing the QMV, so we can indeed experience that from the start. But indeed, we'll see how the process goes also. The Commission taking things further. Okay, and well, looking at time, I will now pass on the floor to Lisa, who will tell you more about the market improvements made in the regulation on CACM. Thank you.
Yeah, exactly. So this second part is focusing on market coupling operation development. I'll try to keep it a bit shorter to get back into the agenda and start directly. So what we see on this slide on the right side is a table. It's an overview of the so-called basic policy changes, which are introduced in the recommendation and are mainly addressed in the initial impact assessment. Partly, they deal with issues related to market coupling governance, and by that they were already implicitly tackled by Mathieu before. And this section will mainly focus on the ones which are related to the operations and the development of the market coupling as such. So to again go with a chronological order, to start in the general provisions, here the main changes relate to the availability of information, to the inclusion of market participants and stakeholders. So what we saw already also in the public consultation in June is a need for further involvement of stakeholders and market participants. So what is recommended is to establish, by NEMOs and TSOs to be established, a permanent forum for the involvement of stakeholders and market participants in issues related to the operation of the market coupling day ahead and intraday, on issues which have direct impact on market participants. Not to be misleading here, this is in not replacing any of the already existing things, which are consultations of TCMs. It's rather an additional measure to get stakeholders and market participants deeper involved in the operations and market development. And a second change here is the introduction of a completely new TCM, a new methodology for the publication of information on the coupling. It shall be developed by all TSOs and all NEMOs, and it's mainly focusing on really defining the entities responsible for providing information to N2E for the publishing, on defining commonly agreed formats, and it defines and shows in the provisions which kind of information need to be available to market participants, also irrespective of the competition between NEMOs, which was a reason for some disputes maybe in the past. If we go further on, the market coupling operations, they are mainly focused on Chapter 4 of CACM. And here, some basic changes for intraday coupling. It's mainly that following the electricity regulation changes, the new target model is introduced. So the continuous trading complemented with implicit intraday auctions, it's newly introduced. It's in the whole structure now. So there are explicit provisions for that and also for their interaction between the continuous trading and the implicit auctions. And for the day ahead, there is one basic change, which is the introduction for a possibility to in future also use the so-called non-uniform pricing. So what we mean here is the inclusion of paradoxically accepted bids, so out of the money bids in the coupling results. And this could be a future option as it significantly reduces the pressure on the algorithm performance. But here it's only amending the clearing reference price definition to allow for it if it's further discussed in the future. And one last thing, already talking about the algorithm, is the treatment of the algorithm source codes. So the recommendation proposes the publication of the algorithm source codes for the day ahead and the intraday coupling 3 years after entry into force. So what is meant here is that the entities performing the MCO tasks would need to procure the intellectual property and afterwards publish the source codes, mainly to enable more transparency and comprehensibility of the price formation in the back. And this is not only because of the interest of ACER and NRAs, but also there is a strong interest from the whole public, from academia, consultancy. And this would also allow for necessary innovation in the whole field of electricity markets. But as we see that the interest is a lot lower in the intraday and the whole setup here is a bit more tricky with the third-party service provider, for the intraday, the proposal is to keep it up to subject of a cost-benefit analysis. So to be further analyzed if the publication is really worth the costs. So then going further, not now finishing kind of with the basic changes, the whole chapter 4 is a bit restructured and also with the goal to better merge and give a better comprehensive overview on the whole coupling processes. And for this, it is mainly the case that we introduce new TCMs. It's two, one for day ahead and one for intraday. I think Mathieu mentioned them also already. They are called timings and procedures. And the idea is that all these kind of separately in the CACM written provisions of the process of coupling are merged within one TCM for day ahead and for intraday. So it deals with input data, the operation, the results. For day ahead, it is fallback, backup. For intraday, the interaction between the auctions and the continuous trading. And of course, for both, it's also on the gate times. And maybe on the gate times, one specific issue we want to highlight here is that the recommendation tries to address the ongoing disputes for with regards to the order book sharing between NEMOs within a bidding zone and also during the entire intraday time frame. So especially for the last hour before delivery or before real time. So the goal of the recommendation here is to better define and explicitly provide for a kind of a separation between two different gate opening and closure times in the intraday time frame. So the idea is to have one set of gate opening and closure times for the trading as such, which is applicable to NEMOs, and one which is applicable to TSOs, which is relevant for the provision of cross-zonal capacity. So by doing this, those two things can be disentangled and NEMOs are obliged to share their order books in the whole time of gate opening until closure of the trading, independently of the gate times for the cross-zonal capacity provision. And in addition, it is explicitly mentioned that NEMOs shall not organize trading outside the day ahead or intraday coupling with the respective product. So for day ahead, meaning starting with the day ahead gate opening time until the starting of the intraday trading, there shall be no trading with day ahead products outside the coupling, and the same for intraday. And one last, let's say, major change in the whole operations, mainly related to post-coupling, Mathieu already tackled about this, is the cross-border clearing and settlement. So a part of making it or proposing to centralize it, a main idea, a basic step is to introduce a new TCM on cross-border clearing and settlement between NEMOs, which shall kind of ensure minimum standards for effective and efficient clearing and settlement, limiting the risk, and also already defining requirements for monitoring and reporting of those standards and the compliance with them. So this TCM shall be developed by all NEMOs. And here in this article, it's also clarified that NEMOs shall not charge each other with any clearing fees for this. This was also already done by an NRA guidance, but here now it's put in a real explicit legal provision. And coming back to the MCO to NEMO, NEMO to MCO model, Mathieu touched upon. the recommendation defines the cross-border clearing and settlement as an MCO task. So we switch from the NEMO to NEMO. Every NEMO interacts with the other to a setup where kind of the MCO is in the middle and acting as a central counterparty to each NEMO for the cross-border clearing and settlement. It's responsible for collecting congestion income and for the scheduling. And on the other side, a NEMO task is acting as counterparty to the MCO, and of course, no change to that, as a counterparty to their market participants. And as was also mentioned, I think NEMO tasks can always be delegated. So this is important here, as it was part of the discussions, that NEMOs can still also delegate this task to third parties, including TSOs, as long, of course, as the requirements are met. So in this case, mainly the standards which are set in the new TCM. Why this is proposed, I think Mathieu already mentioned some main advantages, but what we experienced is that with the non-harmonized and decentralized clearing, this was a major source of implementation delays and also inducing high operational costs. This is mainly due to this kind of unnecessary multiplication of collaterals and also of processes in general. And another big advantage here is the improved third-party access. So what we see is if a new entity, for example, a new NEMO wants to join, it has to get into interaction with all the other NEMOs. But by centralizing it, there would be one single point of contact. There would be no need for any disputes, standardized contracts, and by that, all NEMOs could be treated equally and the level playing field would be strengthened. So having this one single point of contact for each NEMO, this would of course also simplify any implementation of new projects. Maybe important here is that this is also part of this whole transition which was described earlier. So it is not that the TCM would, so the CACM would enter into force and it has to happen immediately. It's rather that the TCM on the settlement is already in the first priority line, so it is due in July 2024. There would be requirements for the usage of this TCM under the current structure, the NEMO to NEMO model. So there are the minimum standards that they can be applied already before the MCO entity enters into force. And then there would be requirements for the development for the transition towards the MCO entity, which would take over with July 2028 after the whole transition has taken place. Yeah, with that, I'm finished and I would hand over, I think, to Apex, to Hélène, to react on the market coupling recommendations. Thank you.
Can you hear me? I don't know.
Yes, I can hear.
Yes, okay.
Yes.
Thanks a lot. Since I don't have control on the slide, I'll just say that we can move to the next one already. First of all, thanks a lot for the opportunity to share our views on this topic. Sorry, so did someone? Okay, yeah, thanks. Yeah, I mean, Lisa, you said it and you presented. After all, you know, this topic is the most important one. It's the efficient, effective operations of market coupling that we should all be focusing on. It's the most important collective objective we have. And our view is that we should not let ourselves get distracted from that collective objective, especially also, as Raphael was saying before, at such critical times for European electricity markets. Having said that, so we regret that the recommendation puts, in fact, what we think is a disproportionate focus on governance. And in our view, this comes really at the expense of building a future-proof framework that actually addresses the needs and also closes some existing gaps. These needs, I've also highlighted them very briefly on this slide. I think they're pretty obvious to everybody on this call. So what I suggest to do now, and we can move to the next slide, is to actually examine a bit more closely the challenges that we as a power exchange, we face on the ground, and to see to what extent the recommendation address these challenges. If we first look at the challenges that relate to arguably the most important thing, the safe and secure operations of market coupling. I would give a few examples. Financial risks are inherent to power trading and they are insufficiently addressed. This is a challenge today. The systemic risk needs to be managed. So in that light, we welcome the new clearing and settlement methodology that Lisa mentioned. It's a good acknowledgement of the need to act. We also welcome the proposal to further harmonize fallback solutions, but it is also clear that much more needs to be done to manage financial risks. Another example, we said, as well as Rafael mentioned, a few partial decoupling incidents we had in the past. We also faced several cases in the past month when no result could be delivered within the current timings. These are really serious challenges we have today. And if we look at the recommendation, the MCO entity doesn't remove the risk of facing the issues that trigger the issues with local systems. And on top, it creates a single point of failure. And thinking about the challenges related to the algorithm timing, the procedure that is now envisaged in case of risks of no results or delayed results is extremely burdensome and very inefficient. So if we then look at some realities and challenges related more to the algorithm and products, because this was also a part of the elements Lisa presented. In terms of challenges, we know that the performance of the algorithm is a pressing concern today, not in 2025, not in 2028. And if we look at the recommendation, we, from IPEX side, are quite disappointed to see that product development is considered, I quote, a second-order priority. We also know it's a fact that the implementation of 15 minutes MTU is a huge challenge. Why? Mostly because it's heavily dependent on local specificities and local regulations, which are here to stay, and the MCO entity will not change anything to that. And meanwhile, we also know that some products have a disproportionate impact on the algorithm performance, and it will continue to be the case as long as national legislations are in place. If we look at the provisions on the algorithm, the ones on the algorithm methodology do not guarantee in any way that performance issues can be addressed. The main change introduced is indeed to leave the door open to non-uniform pricing, but it's a very ill-defined and complex concept for the time being. So if we sum up on the algorithm, instead of providing a clear target for the development of the algorithm, we actually end up with more uncertainty. And finally, concluding with this, if we look at arguably another very important aspect is the challenges for the development of the market as a whole. There as well, today's challenges are quite obvious. One of them is the lack of capacity that's made available for trading. ACER regularly reports on this in specific reports. We also know that flow-based market coupling still needs to be delivered in the Nordics, whereas it went live in CWE already 2015. We also know that intraday markets are developing rapidly, especially in CWE as the market design enables it, whereas in other regions, and in particular in Nordic regions, we're seriously lagging behind. So, for example, no trading is possible in the last hour in the Nordics, with one exception. So, again, these are big challenges we face today. If we look at the recommendation, the focus is almost exclusively on the sharing of order books across all timeframes, and as Lisa mentioned it, the ban on trading outside of SDAC and SIDC. And all this also without a single impact assessment or economic evaluation. In terms of implication, with the current recommendation, the Nordic intraday markets can remain underdeveloped for the decade to come, and it doesn't seem to be an issue. Where are the incentives to enable trading in the last hour in the Nordics? We don't see any of those in the recommendation. Meanwhile, those who innovated, developed new products and trading possibilities are being on the one hand punished, and on the other completely discouraged to keep innovating. I just want to be clear about the fact that if we had had such recommendation in place in the past years, 15-minute products would never have seen the light. So also knowing last facts and reality about market coupling, that in the future, significant investments are needed in products and system performance, including to cope with digitalization, use of APIs. We still have a lot of questions when after this, the publication of this recommendation. First question, why is a monopoly setup such as the MCO single entity considered better equipped to innovate? It's quite an interesting approach. Second question, who can guarantee that the MCO entity will invest in the new systems and who will pay for them? And the last point, since we heard quite some focus on intraday, intraday is an important aspect, but also why does ACER refuse to hear the concerns raised about the pan-European IDAs and their potential impact on the continuous trading if there is no recalculation of capacity? So to sum up, I've highlighted what we see as the biggest challenge for market coupling, market development in the years to come. Unfortunately, despite a few positive elements, the recommendation does not address these challenges, and it puts the functioning, the development, and the resilience of the market at risk, also at the expenses of innovation and climate goals. Thank you.
Thank you, Hélène. I think we go, yes, to Nord Pool now. Birgit.
Yeah, thanks, Matthew. If you could please show the next slide. So we want to make a few general remarks before we go into the details. So the first one, obviously, that from our perspective, a single legal MCO entity is not needed to and will not resolve any of the problems in multi-NEMO competition. So there is a difference between the operation of the MCO and the performance of competitive PX business tasks, which obviously ACER has on the one hand recognized in the new proposal, but we are very worried that when it comes to competition this morning in the presentation, it seems to suggest that the single legal entity will resolve these problems. So this is not the case. However, we appreciate that the regulation, independent from the single legal entity, will mandate that market liquidity needs to be shared at all times of all the markets. This is a very, very big step forward. The previous version of CACM has introduced competition between NEMOs in multi-NEMO areas, but has stopped short of creating the level playing field that it claimed it has created, but we've seen over the last 6 years in practice that it didn't create a clear legal basis. So we very much appreciate that the proposal that ACER made in many respects really provides clarity. However, we are also in some ways critical of the proposal. First of all, the opening of monopoly areas for competition. That doesn't happen. ACER says that they will obviously introduce a mechanism to reevaluate this together with DGNA in the next few years. However, from our perspective, they already had 6 years to look at monopoly areas and evaluate them for competition. And this is really severely skewing the level playing field between NEMOs, the competition between competitive NEMOs and NEMOs in monopoly areas. And the last thing, and perhaps the most important thing, is that we are very worried about the timeline for implementing ACER's recommendations on the level playing field improvements. So it seems to be tied to the issue of the MCO governance. There doesn't seem to be any possibility, according to ACER, to implement these level playing field competition improvements prior to the MCO governance. And if we look at the timeline for the MCO governance implementation, it will probably only happen 2023 or later. And we cannot wait from a competitive NEMOs perspective longer than that. The level playing field between NEMOs requires urgent implementation, ASAP, and also a new methodology for day-ahead fallback that is important for competition should be developed and implemented ASAP. So the next slide, please. The things, as I said, that we are very, very appreciative of is the improvements that ACER introduces into this new version of CACM, which provide for a clear legal basis for shared access to market liquidity at all times. And obviously, as Lisa Marie mentioned, these provisions in Article 42 and 43 that clearly state that the priority is for the liquidity to be shared, be it in day ahead and be it in intraday. So our expectation, obviously, from these two provisions is that there will be no doubt in the future by any of the NRAs or ACER or anybody else dealing with these provisions that the current local day-ahead and intraday auctions operated by individual NEMOs close to the proximity of the SDAC and the single intraday coupling timeframes cannot proceed, but need to be replaced, if at all, by pan-European auctions. And also there is no room for any local continuous markets within day-ahead and intraday products, as currently there are local markets operated by individual incumbent NEMOs. Could I have the next slide, please? We are also very appreciative of the improvements or the clear legal basis that ACER proposes for opening the intraday market and for closing the intraday market. So now, obviously, it's very clear from the provision that the continuous intraday trading opens in connection with the ACER earlier rulings from 2018, opens at 3 o'clock. Our expectation in this respect, obviously, is also that the TSOs in CWE will now start providing cross-zonal capacities from 3 o'clock in CET, so that this is not just a bidding zone internal market from 3 o'clock in CWE, but it's also a cross-zonal market from 3 o'clock CET, so that the single intraday coupling in CWE is finally implemented completely. Could I have the next slide, please? The clarity, obviously, also we very much appreciate that ACER introduced is for the closing of the intraday market. That it's now very clear from the provisions in the draft CACM that even if the cross-zonal market closes, so after the intraday cross-zonal gate closure time, irrespective of when this is defined, be it 60 minutes prior to delivery or be it at an earlier or later time, that then the rules of the single intraday coupling under the CACM regulation still continue and are applicable to the time period thereafter if there is bidding zone internal trading that continues. So more specifically, meaning the shared order book in the last hour of the intraday market in the CWE area. This is a very important step forward for allowing finally true multi-NEMO competition in the CWE intraday markets to take place. Thank you. That's further points from my side.
Thank you, Birgit. I now give the floor to Rose Sargent from NASDAQ.
Good morning, everyone. Yes, my name is Rose Sargent. I work for NASDAQ's European Commodities team. You may know NASDAQ as the commodity derivatives exchange, mainly in the Nordic region, but we are looking to extend the derivatives market with spot products and hope to go live later this year. Next slide, please. So just to take a step back, there was a lot of information here in the last two presentations, but looking forward and looking towards our goals for Europe, we are working towards a net carbon economy in 2050. And to achieve that, we need to phase out coal, gas and oil. and we need to ramp up electricity. And you can see from this graph here, calculations made available by Eurelectric, we're looking at a doubling of demand from roughly 3 terawatt hours today to 6 in 2050. What does that mean? It means that, as far as we see it, electricity is the commodity of the future. It means there will be more trading in electricity, and it will be more interesting for other exchanges to set up a NEMO business. And this is a good thing because competition between power exchanges leads to lower fees, better services, and more innovation on trading, clearing, and settlement services. So next slide, please. What we have today, we have a NEMO license which we can use throughout Europe, which is great. We also have shared order books, as was already mentioned, both for day ahead and intraday, which pools liquidity. On the other hand, we do have some problems. We don't have any new entrants today, new entrant NEMOs, which is striking. We have a very complex governance structure, many layers. We have a lack of a level playing field between NEMOs, and we have the issue that all NEMOs together have to run the MCO. And that means as a new NEMO that you are obliged to set up your staffing a similar way to an incumbent NEMO. Then we see it's an issue that we as a NEMO need to change infrastructure to accommodate markets for which we have no commercial incentives. For example, the fact that we need to change Euphemia and PNB for balancing markets. And lastly, as a new NEMO, you need to compete with incumbent NEMOs who are co-owned by TSOs and have been heavily subsidized by TSOs for many years. Next slide, please. So as a new NEMO, we see it is very costly to set up a new exchange, and high costs means high fees, which is of course detrimental for traders. We see there should be in the long term an efficient market set up, and the objectives should be to remove barriers to entry and to reduce transaction costs. The NEMO should focus on its customers and the needs of the market. Centralization on TSO side, which is done via RCCs, should be met on the NEMO side as well, where monopolistic tasks can be carried out by the MCO entity. We see that will make operations more cost efficient. There's no need to double PNB Euphemia infrastructure across Europe limitlessly. The new NEMO can be serviced by this entity based on regulated fees and giving equal access to all NEMOs to the market infrastructure. Next slide, please. Then in specific, in respect to Title IV, we welcome a full pooling of liquidity and see that this will give the best prices, of course, for the market, and it also fuels an actual single market, which we're supposed to have in the EU. We are in the year 2022. We have self-driving cars, but we still have a closure time for intraday, which is an hour before delivery. So as long as we can't shorten that closer to actual delivery time, then there has to be an arrangement to share order books in the last hour to achieve a level playing field and to, again, to pool that liquidity in the last hour as well. Title 4 has, again, the setup with methodologies, which is good. It allows some flexibility. And we also welcome the single shipper model as we interpret ACER's recommendation to contain. This means that you no longer need bilateral clearing and settlement arrangements between CCPs, and that there will be common standards for clearing and settlement, risk management, collateral handling, etc. So all in all, a very large role for the MCO, and we have NEMOs, which are licensed under CACM. You have CCPs, which are licensed under EMIR, if you're lucky. You have TSOs, which are certified as well, but then the MCO seems to be left out. So happy days for the MCO, which is not good. I mean, there should be some kind of a supervision for the MCO because that company will have a very central role to market coupling. That's all from my side.
Thank you, Rose. I think the next up is Helene Robert.
Yes. Hello.
Electric. Go ahead,
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, good morning, everyone. So, Hélène Robert, and I'm talking today on behalf of IFET and Euroelectric. So thanks a lot for giving us the opportunity to share our views. On our side, as you know, of course, the market coupling functioning is really key. And we're glad to see actually today that we do not discuss only about MCO governance, which is of course very important, but for us, which is not the only point of interest and of concern. So on our side, we will, I think, focus our key messages on the other aspects. So you can go to next slide. The first slide is related to intraday functioning. So for us, what is really key is to make sure that the very powerful tool that we have today, so the continuous intraday trading, continues to work and is even improved. Intraday markets are really key. They will be more and more important, especially with the increase of RES production. And we provided several proposals to improve it that were not retained. So we are a bit disappointed for that, but we hope that still some of them can be considered. We have listed them on the slide. I propose to save some time and not detailed all of them. But we are in particular worried on the establishment of intraday auctions, and we would have liked to limit their number formally, I mean, to officialize that, to make sure that the portfolio bidding becomes possible everywhere, to limit as well the suspension of the continuous market for the running of the auctions. And so, voilà, those are recommendations that we make to make sure that the intraday continuous market is even improved and for sure is maintained in the future. So you can go to next slide. Of course, as market participants, we are the ones impacted by the products that are available to us. So for us, what is really key is to make sure the product definition is improved. So we welcome some of the improvements in the proposal, but we think that some could even go further or be more ambitious or be more precise. It is really important that the products fit the needs of the market participants, because as I said, we are the ones using them at the end. So for instance, we think that the evolution of algorithm and of coupling timing changes should really be conditional to the efficiency of the market coupling. We would like to make sure that new releases accommodate existing products that exist in at least 3 member states. And we would like to make sure that for any possible evolution or debate around the non-uniform pricing, that there is important market participant involvement with the consultation process, because that obviously would create quite some changes. If you go to the next slide, on transparency and consultation requirements, we really welcome the improvements, but again, some could even be go beyond or be more precise. For instance, we would like to secure the minimum 2 months consultation period. We welcome the publication of the algorithm, but it could even be stronger without the conditioning to the CBA, as it was mentioned at the beginning of this workshop. And on the publication of aggregated curve, to avoid the kind of hiccup or difficulties we encountered the last 2 years, it could even be more precise by specifying that it should include all executed orders to avoid misinterpretation or difficulties in the future. And the last point, finally, on the next slide, on the market coupling operation. I think for us, what really matters the most, of course, is the efficiency and the good functioning of the market coupling. But what we really care about is the market parties' involvement. So we really, of course, want the market coupling to work well. And we would like to continue the work of intervention and market surveillance that has been started. And we think that the market participant involvement could be even more formalized, for instance, being maybe a bit less restrictive than topics that are directly impacting market participants, because that can sometimes be difficult to say what is directly impacting or not. So for that, we of course welcome the proposal of the forum, but the scope and the scope of this forum should even be enlarged. And maybe the last point to mention would also be to preserve the need to justify the existence of monopoly NEMO. I think we always support competition, and we would like to maintain this in the future. So that was it on our side. So thank you again for giving us the opportunity to share the views.
Thank you very much, Hélène. This is Christian taking over from Mathieu. I think it's very good that we had such a number of presenters in this session, so you're able to offer your views on the recommendations we have put forward to the Commission. At the same time, that does mean we're just running slightly behind schedule. I hope you'll bear with us. It is unlikely we will end at 11:30. I think we'll overrun by just a little bit. We have a brief Q&A session, which Christophe Chancreux will moderate, who has our electricity department, and we don't want to miss sort of the closing and the indications of next steps by Anna-Marie of the Commission. So if you'll bear with us a bit, we may run 5-10 minutes over the allotted time, and I turn over to you, Christophe.
Thank you, Christian. Good morning to everyone. In the interest of time, I will focus. So thank you, first of all, for your questions. In the interest of time, I will focus on 3 sets of questions. The first one is about the MCO function, and it's a question from Eric, maybe for Martin. The question is about the benefits of the decentralized MCO function. There are, according to Eric, strong benefits from this decentralized MCO function with a robust operational security. And the question is, how will a more centralized approach will be able to guarantee at least the same level of robustness? And maybe there is a follow-up question, Martin, for you from Sebastian. About the welfare gain from this moving to the centralized MCO function, whether these welfare gains have been quantified by ACER.
Yeah, thank you, Christophe. So good morning, everyone, from my side. First, hearing some of the concerns, you may get the impression that we went completely crazy on this proposal. But in actuality, what we did is we really deeply investigated all these problems, all these concerns. We really discussed a lot with stakeholders and NEMOs and TSOs. And our recommendation is resulting from this deep investigation and deep understanding of the problems that we see. With regard to the decentralized MCO function, the issue is, as some mention, is that the current benefit of this is that we have a cloud where there are, I think, currently 9 or 10 NEMOs participating, each with its own infrastructure. And then this infrastructure as a cloud guarantees sufficient operational security of the system. I think this concept can remain equally at the single entity. The entity can still have such a cloud, can have several locations, can have several offices, but it doesn't need to have 10 different locations, 10 different servers, 10 different offices, and 10 different teams. It can be 2 or 3 to ensure sufficient level of operational security. With this regard, we just taking into account this, that we don't need 10 different teams and servers and locations. We can expect significant cost savings, but again, the operational cost savings are not our main driver for proposing this. Our main driver is to enable faster implementation of the projects, and in our view, the faster implementation of the projects is partly being impacted by the fact that the operation is quite complex, but mostly it's because we are not able to implement and test several different projects at the same time. And why we are not able to do that? Because the architecture is such that each NEMO needs to participate in each testing, and we don't have enough resources at each individual NEMO to be able to, for example, implement core and Nordic flow-based and test it at the same time. I mean, that's a concept which we are struggling with to introduce, but so far we have to wait with one project until the second one is finished. So this implementation delays and implementation complexity, that's the main objective why we want these resources to be centralized, and by this, hopefully to have more resources to be able to implement several issues at the same time in parallel. Whether the costs and benefits are quantified at this moment, no. We hope that the Commission will complement this in their impact assessment before going with the proposal into comitology. But we have seen at least some views that we can naturally expect that the costs would be reduced both in operation, but as well as in implementation. Thanks.
Thank you, Martin. 2 other questions. One maybe for Lisa from Marie. It's about the impact of non-uniform pricing on the clearing. Assuming this is implemented at some point, will there be a proper assessment of the impact of this pricing methodology on market prices?
Exactly. So maybe to again mention that this is not set. It could be a possible future development. So what is important here is also to mention that from first analysis, it's that the clearing price would still be there for the majority of the volumes. So there is really a tiny fraction which would be paradoxically accepted bids. And also maybe mentioning, going back to what I presented, is the establishment of the permanent forum for stakeholders and market participants. So as we introduce this, of course, any change, especially of the pricing mechanism with, of course, impact on market participants would be discussed and further open to the public by that. Yeah.
Thank you. Lisa, maybe you can take the next question about the publication of the algorithm.
Yeah, exactly. I can take the algorithm. So I think I saw a question on which ones. So it is actually both, but a cost-benefit analysis on the intraday shall be done before. And I think the other question was on how this would work. So the essence is that we see the need for transparency here. We see the need for transparency on the price formation. And by that, the MCO entity or entities would need to procure the algorithm. So it would be either a buy-off of the existing owners, or it could be a new tender, and then publish it. The detail, so this is the main provisions which are set in CSM 2.0, and the details are up to the implementation as such.
Thank you, Lisa. Maybe we have time for one last question about the opening of cross-zonal intraday trading in the last hour before delivery. This is a question from Paul, and the question is whether this should not be a priority for all of us. Martin, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, so this is a very good question. I think we have it on our list to do's for the next years, but this problem is very complex because, you know, it interferes with the balancing processes. So currently, vast majority of TSOs do not allow last hour intraday trading because they do balancing, and mainly because they do also congestion management in real time in parallel with balancing. So we have this fundamental conflict also in the regulation. It's there that balancing energy gate closure time and intraday trading should not overlap. We see in some member states that it can, but to be able to overlap, we need to, most member states need to completely redesign their balancing and congestion management paradigm. And to push majority of member states into something completely different is a very difficult political process. We are pushing, we are trying, but it's the process. And if stakeholders can help, if stakeholders can push as well, we can achieve something. But it's a difficult and challenging task ahead. It is on our agenda, but it's not possible to achieve it very soon.
Thank you very much, Martin. I think we are running a bit late, and I'm tempted to give the floor now to Anna Maria from the European Commission to maybe tell us about the next steps, and to have some concluding remarks, and maybe say a few words about the next steps. Thank you, Anna Maria.
Thank you, Christophe, and good morning, everyone. Well, I will be very brief. I would just like to thank, first of all, ACER and the NRA for the huge efforts that they have put into developing proposal for the CACM amendments, and of course, all the TSOs and NEMOs and market participants who have been very actively involved in this process. From our point of view, I think what we have appreciated the most is that all the actors involved did not shy away from discussing all of the issues that we have encountered so far in the implementation of the CACM and the possible solution. And this is of utmost importance because we have to seize the opportunity of reviewing the network code and come up with future-proof and robust solutions. So we are sure we can count on you to keep up this cooperative and constructive spirit also for the next steps in the process, which are briefly summarized in these slides. As you know, the Commission will have to now elaborate the proposal for the amendments based on ACER recommendation, on its own analysis, and on the results of a public consultation, which we aim at launching in spring this year. So once the proposal is developed, we will we can then launch the comitology process. We aim at doing that after the summer in order to have the revised network code entering into force in early 2023. This is it from my side. Thank you.
Thank you very much for rounding us out, Anna Maria. I think we will draw on you again after lunch if you'll still be available.
Yes.
Excellent. Thanks a lot, and also to the participants. Thanks for dialing in and bearing with us as we run a little bit over time. This was our first session here before lunch on the recommendations put forward to the Commission. Many of you will know we have a follow-up session after lunch, which starts at 1 promptly, which will focus on capacity calculation, bidding zone review, and system operation regulation, those components of the recommendation we have forwarded to the Commission. This will run for 1 hour, so slightly shorter than this one. So with that, I would conclude this first half of our CACM 2.0 webinar and look forward to seeing as many of you as possible dialing back at 1 o'clock, preferably a few minutes before 1 o'clock after lunch. Thanks a lot and see you soon.